You're watching Phantom Astronaut's Night Terrors, where we unravel the terrifying truths behind folklore that has endured through centuries. Tonight, we turn to the chilling legend of Frau Perchta, the enigmatic and vengeful spirit of Alpine tradition. Known as both a benevolent giver of gifts and a merciless punisher, her story is a reminder of what happens when ancient expectations are ignored. If you're captivated by these dark tales, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to help the channel grow. Check the links in the description for more ways to support us. Now settle in as we delve into the shadowy tale of Frau Perchta. The snow fell in thick, soundless sheets over the small village of Hallstatt, coating its ancient wooden homes and the frozen lake in a blanket of icy quiet. It was the 12th night after Christmas, the final night of Yuletide, and the villagers huddled in their homes, their shutters latched and fires roaring, unwilling to test the dark legends that hung over this time of year. Frau Perchta walked tonight, or so the stories went, and no one wanted to draw her gaze. Clara Müller had heard those stories her entire life. As a child, she had sat by her grandmother's feet, listening with wide eyes as the old woman spun tales of the eerie figure who visited homes on these cold, dark nights. Frau Perchta, the grandmother had whispered, was no mere spirit. She was ancient, older than the mountains themselves, a relic of the days when gods walked among mortals. "Be good, Clara," her grandmother would warn. "Finish your chores. Spin your flax. If you don't, she'll know. She'll open you up and stuff your belly with straw." Clara used to laugh nervously at the gruesome imagery, thinking it was just a tale to keep children obedient. But now, as a young woman, alone in her tiny home, at the edge of the woods, she wasn't laughing. The hearth crackled, the only sound in the small room, as Clara worked the spinning wheel in her lap. The firelight cast flickering shadows on the rough wooden walls, and the faint smell of pine smoke clung to the air. She was spinning flax into thread, her fingers moving deftly, the rhythm of the wheel a steady counterpoint to the wind howling outside. She wasn't afraid, not really. But there was something about the night, the silence, the way the wind seemed to carry faint whispers, that made her uneasy. She glanced toward the window, where frost had etched delicate patterns across the glass, and saw only the swirling white of the snowstorm. Her mother had told her not to stay up too late. "Finish your spinning," she'd said before leaving for the church festival in the village center. "Don't leave it undone. Frau Perchta doesn't take kindly to laziness." Clara had rolled her eyes at the warning, but now, alone in the house with only the wind and her thoughts, she found herself working faster, her fingers moving in a blur. The first sound was so faint she thought she'd imagined it, a soft creak, like the groan of old wood. She paused, her hand hovering over the spinning wheel, and listened. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney, but otherwise, the house was silent. Clara shook her head, muttering to herself, and went back to her work. But then it came again, louder this time. A deliberate creak, like the floorboards under a heavy step. She froze, her pulse quickening, and turned toward the door. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling. No answer, just the wind pressing against the walls like a restless thing, and the soft, rhythmic creak of footsteps moving closer. Clara stood, her spinning wheel forgotten, and grabbed the iron poker from the hearth. The firelight gleamed off its blackened surface as she held it in front of her, like a weapon, her heart pounding so loudly she thought it might burst. The footsteps stopped. She turned slowly, her eyes darting toward the window, and gasped. Something was out there, standing just beyond the edge of the firelight. A figure, tall and gaunt, its silhouette distorted by the frost-covered glass. "Who's there?" Clara shouted, her voice cracking. The figure didn't move, but she could feel its gaze, heavy and penetrating, as though it could see straight through the walls and into her soul. And then, without a sound, it stepped away, disappearing into the snowstorm. Clara backed away from the window, her hands shaking. She wanted to convince herself it was a trick of the light, or perhaps one of the villagers on their way to the church. But deep down, she knew better. She knew the stories. Frau Perchta had come. The door rattled, and Clara bit back a scream. The latch held, but the wood groaned under the weight of something pressing against it. She gripped the poker tighter, her knuckles white as the sound of scratching filled the air. Long, deliberate strokes, like claws dragging across the door. "Please," Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I've done my work. I've spun my flax." The scratching stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then a voice, low and hollow, like the echo of wind in a cave, drifted through the door. "Have you, child?" it asked. "Have you been diligent?" Clara's knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, her back pressed against the hearth. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body refused to move. The voice came again, closer this time, as though it were inside the room. "Shall I see for myself?" The fire flickered, the flames dimming as a cold, unnatural wind swept through the house. The door creaked open, though no hand touched it, and the figure stepped inside. Frau Perchta was taller than any human, her frame impossibly thin, her long, bony fingers tipped with claws that gleamed in the firelight. Her face was hidden beneath a veil, but her eyes burned through the fabric, bright and merciless. She carried a distaff in one hand, its sharp end stained dark, and a sack slung over her shoulder. Clara tried to speak, to plead, but her voice was gone, swallowed by the crushing weight of Frau Perchta's presence. The figure moved closer, her movements slow and deliberate, and reached out a clawed hand. "You're spinning," she said, her voice soft but cold. "Let me see." With trembling hands, Clara gestured toward the spinning wheel. Frau Perchta bent over it, her veil brushing the floor, and examined the flax. For a long moment, she was silent. Then she straightened, her claws curling into fists. "It is enough," she said, her voice sharp as ice. "This time." She turned and strode toward the door, her long shadow stretching across the room. But before she disappeared into the storm, she looked back, her burning eyes meeting Clara's. "Next year," she said, "be sure of it." And then she was gone. Clara sat by the hearth until dawn, the poker still clutched in her hands, the fire long since burned out. When her mother returned and found her there, pale and trembling, she didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. The claw marks on the door and the faint scent of cold wind lingering in the air were enough. For the rest of her life, Clara made sure her spinning was finished, well before 12th night. And every winter, as the snow fell thick and the nights stretched long, she would glance toward the window, half expecting to see a tall, gaunt figure watching from the shadows. Thank you for joining me on this chilling journey into the legend of Frau Perchta. If tonight's episode of Phantom Astronaut's Night Terrors left you unsettled, remember to like, share, and subscribe to help the channel grow. Don't forget to check the links in the description for more ways to support us. This has been Phantom Astronaut's Nocturnal Tales. I'll see you out there